Hannah was born and grew up in a village. She was a late, long-awaited child of her parents, so she was literally bathed in love and acceptance as a child. She was taken care of, smiled at, hugged and listened to attentively. Money was scarce in the family, but this did not bother Hannah. Most neighbours lived similarly, and those who were wealthier moved to the city. Hannah studied in a small village school. There were only 9 other students in her class. She knew that city classes had 20 or more students, but it was hard for her to imagine. Time passed, and Hannah quickly grew up. As a teenager, she realized she wanted more than her mature parents had. They were good and honest people, content with what they had, valuing peace and quiet. They had enough for food and clothes, and that was fine for them. One day, a tragedy struck. Hannah's father became seriously ill. They took him to the city for examination, and he was admitted to the hospital. It turned out that he needed expensive surgery. Of course, the family could not have such money. Even if they sold their old house, they wouldn't have enough. The aged man was treated, but free therapy did not have the desired effect. In the end, the disease took its toll. Hannah and her mother were left alone. That's when Hannah realized she would become, if not rich, then at least very wealthy. Money meant freedom, security, and the ability to solve many problems. She decided to start by getting a good education. Earlier, she thought she would go to college in the nearest small town, but now she wanted to go to the capital. It was far, hard and scary, but the best opportunities were there. Her mother was worried, but supported her aspiration and even hired tutors for Hannah. Although the family had little money, Hannah studied hard, forgetting about friends, parties and rest. She needed to fill many gaps in her education. And eventually, Hannah's hard work with her tutor paid off. Soon, she managed to enter the university at the Faculty of Economics. Seeing her name on the enrollment list, the happy graduate jumped for joy. It was all worth it. She did it. The university wasn't the most prestigious, but it provided dormitory accommodation for non-resident students. Hannah needed that place, as she couldn't afford to rent an apartment in the capital. So, Hannah left her native village, promising her mother that she would finish university, find a good job in the city, and then bring her to live with her. "The medicine is better there, and life is more interesting," assured the daughter to her mother. "You'll see, it will be good there." Her mother smiled and nodded, but there was anxiety in her eyes. She was afraid to let such a young girl go alone, especially in a huge metropolis. There are so many dangers for an inexperienced provincial girl. However, the mother's fears for Hannah were unfounded. Hannah had a goal, and confidently pursued it. Student parties, clubs and bars mostly passed her by. Of course, sometimes Hannah went out with the girls to have fun, but very rarely because she was completely focused on her studies. She saw how easy it was to relax a little, fail a session, and then be dropped out of university, losing everything. Hannah couldn't afford that. She had worked hard to have the opportunity to study. The children of wealthy parents could relax. They could make up for their lack of knowledge with crisp bills. Hannah couldn't do that, and besides, she found learning interesting. She was becoming smarter and more confident, with clear perspectives. Now the girl didn't just dream of becoming wealthy, she roughly understood how to achieve it. When Hannah was in her final year, her mother died of a heart attack. The woman had been unwell for a long time, but tried not to burden her daughter. For a long time, Hannah couldn't believe she was all alone in the world. She had no relatives other than her parents. The girl suffered and cried. She reconsidered her reality and almost failed a session, but by then she had earned a certain reputation, so she was given a second chance and received help. Gradually, Hannah came to her senses and continued her path to financial independence. Now that she was alone, it became the most important thing for her. She wanted to feel free and protected. The surrounding girls also dreamed of a beautiful life, but almost all of them came from wealthy families. Maybe not super rich, but still. Beautiful clothes, fancy gadgets, entertainment, and travelling were all part of their lives. For Hannah, however, money represented power and security. She realised that there was no one to help her with this life. She would have to rely on herself, and nothing could move her from that path. "Oh, Hannah, but there is another way to live beautifully," assured Hannah's classmate Lauren, with whom the girl was somewhat friends. Lauren constantly persuaded Hannah to go to a club or a bar, using what she thought were strong arguments. "You don't have to become a blue stocking and break your teeth on the granite of science. You're beautiful and young, and there are plenty of rich guys around. Why don't we go meet someone? You'll see, it's much more fun than studying." Hannah just shook her head. No, that wasn't an option for her. Dependence on someone wasn't what she had dreamed of. Dependence. Now, almost 10 years later, Hannah couldn't understand how she had ended up in such a vulnerable position. Sometimes she wondered how her life would have turned out if it hadn't been for that chance encounter with Gilbert that had changed everything. At that time, Hannah had already graduated from university. Immediately after graduation, she was invited to work at a large oil company. She was one of the best students, so her candidacy was recommended to the employer. She had to learn many new things. What was written in textbooks did not always work in practice, and Hannah soon realized this. She often stayed in the office until midnight, learning and adopting the experience of senior colleagues. It was difficult, but the salary was good, and the prospects were encouraging. Her bosses noticed her hard work and periodically gave her bonuses. She was constantly climbing the career ladder. Soon, Hannah managed to save up for her own apartment. It was a small, single apartment in a not too prestigious neighbourhood, but it was her own space, earned independently. She had to sell the village house to make repairs to the apartment, but Hannah had no regrets. She was not planning to return to her native village anyway. Everything was going exactly as Hannah had planned. She had a good job and her own apartment. She worked hard for it, but she understood that in real life, unlike fairy tales, success requires hard work. It was hard, of course. Hannah sometimes wanted to live like her peers, travel, meet guys, and have fun with friends. Nevertheless, she led an entirely different life, work and household. She had to rely only on herself. And then one day, Hannah finally decided to go on vacation. She was given 2 weeks off from work. She had the money for a vacation, and everyone around her was always flying and going somewhere. So why not? Hannah chose a resort recommended by a colleague. She brought some bright summer clothes, packed a suitcase, and flew from the cold city spring straight into the hot tropical summer. Alone. None of her friends could leave the city at that time. Hannah saw the sea for the first time in her life. It was beautiful, lying on the sand, enjoying the gentle sun, and listening to the waves. Finally, she relaxed and properly rested. A change of scenery was very conducive to this. Hannah didn't even take any excursions. She just rested on the shore next to the sea and felt happy and peaceful. Most of the guests at the hotel were elderly people, couples, or those with their grandchildren. Hannah was quite satisfied with this. She was not desiring adventure and just wanted to rest. One day, as she was about to leave the beach for dinner at the hotel, he came up to her. Gilbert, a young man in shorts and a tight pumped torso, a white t-shirt under a bronze and tan, laughing turquoise eyes, a charming white-toothed smile, and slightly ruffled hair the colour of ripe wheat. "Hi," he said to Hannah as if they had known each other for years. "I've been watching you for a long time. You're so beautiful and always alone." "Hi," Hannah smiled at him. She couldn't take her eyes off his mesmerizing eyes. He was a real looker. They started talking and getting acquainted. The young man introduced himself, said he was vacationing with his family, and they rented a bungalow near the hotel. He also confessed that every evening he watched her from afar because he liked her very much. "You're incredibly beautiful," Gilbert said, looking straight into Hannah's soul. "You probably get told that a lot, don't you?" Hannah shook her head. She had almost no experience with men. She was always too busy studying and working. Now she felt dizzy from his compliments. Men had tried to get to know her before, but Hannah was always guarded. Now she wanted to be near Gilbert. He was so handsome, so gallant, so pleasant to talk to. Perhaps it was the fact that she was by the sea for the first time, and alone. Anyway, they began an affair. It was beautiful, bright and hot. Hannah finally allowed herself to be frivolous and reckless. Gilbert showed her different places at the resort, not the usual tourist spots. They watched sunsets in the mountains, kissed in flowering groves, and scuba dived on deserted beaches. Hannah thought she wasn't capable of because she had always been afraid of deep water, but Gilbert persuaded her, and she didn't regret it. She had never seen such beauty with her own eyes. Coral reefs and sea creatures in their natural environment. It was a whole other world. There were clubs, discos, and delicious, instantly intoxicating cocktails. Gilbert seemed genuinely in love with Hannah. He gently embraced her, looked at her with admiration, showered her with compliments, and surprised her. Hannah realized that this was probably a resort romance, and such relationships usually don't continue. But she tried not to think about it, and for the first time in her life, enjoyed the moment without overthinking. Unexpectedly, the resort romance continued. Hannah flew back to her city earlier. The vacation ended and she needed to return to work and her usual life. The day before, Gilbert held her in his arms for a long time and confessed his love. "I don't want to let you go. I would spend my whole life with you here, in this paradise." Hannah only smiled sadly. She too was sad that the fairy tale was ending. But she was used to thinking realistically and realized that Gilbert would quickly forget her. He would probably find someone else before the end of the vacation and say the same words to another girl without lying. He's not lying now. He probably feels this way, but it's just a vacation romance, nothing to count on. Although the girl didn't want to part with Gilbert either. He was witty, kind, generous, gallant. With him, Hannah felt fragile and beautiful, desirable and protected. It was nice to feel that someone cared about you again, that you weren't alone. Hannah didn't expect it, but Gilbert continued to communicate with her, called, sent photos from the sea and wrote long messages. So the resort romance wasn't left at the resort. Then Gilbert returned home. He lived in the same city and called Hannah for a date. The girl's heart was pounding frantically that night. Is it really true? He hasn't forgotten me and wants to continue the relationship. I wonder how it will be here, in the big city, not on the seashore. What if he is disappointed in me? Luckily, Hannah was worried about nothing. As soon as Gilbert saw her, he rushed to her, embraced her, and pressed her against him. All Hannah's doubts immediately fell away. "You cannot imagine how much I missed you. I dreamed about you." A chance meeting at the resort turned into something serious, real, warm and light. Gilbert and Hannah went on dates, talked a lot, and gradually became close to each other. Hannah knew that Gilbert was still living with his parents. He graduated from university, worked at his uncle's firm, but dreamed of his own business. The plan was already in place. He only lacked money to start, but he was working hard on it, saving and investing. They talked a lot about this future business. The idea seemed promising to Hannah, and she had enough knowledge and experience to discuss it with Gilbert. The young man marvelled at her intelligence and creativity. "Next to you, I'm not afraid of anything at all," he used to say. "We'll move mountains together. We'll build an empire." "We'll become rich and independent," Hannah immediately added. "We'll earn so much that we can travel without worrying about anything. Hired workers will do everything for us, but it won't happen quickly." "It's okay. We'll overcome everything." Soon, Gilbert and Hannah were living together in Hannah's apartment. Gilbert had his own separate apartment. His parents bought him an apartment in a prestigious neighbourhood, but set the condition that he would move there only when he got married. It was a family nest, not a bachelor's den. Slowly, the young couple started their own business. Time and money for the business was scarce at first, so progress was slow. Hannah and Gilbert continued to work at their jobs, but every spare penny was now put into the business. They had to economize, cut back on expenses, but they both understood what it was all for. Soon it became obvious that they needed large investments for further development. But where to get the money? That's when Gilbert came up with what he thought was a brilliant idea. "What if you sell your apartment? There is only one bedroom, so we're not going to live here anyway, because we need something bigger, more decent. But after selling it, we'll have just enough money to start our company." Hannah shook her head. "How can I sell my only dwelling?" Yes, the apartment was tiny, but it was her own hard-earned living space, and it was scary to be homeless again, especially since their business was still shaky. There was no telling if anything serious would come of it. "And besides, where are we going to live?" Hannah asked. She simply did not know what to answer her beloved. "I've thought it all out. We're getting married. I wanted to propose to you for a long time anyway. We'll get married and move into my apartment. You know that my parents gave me such a stupid condition. In the new apartment, only with my wife. The apartment is big, beautiful, nice neighbourhood. We'll be better off there. And we'll sell your apartment and put the money into circulation. We'll succeed, you'll see. We'll be rich, as we dreamed once, and we'll achieve everything ourselves. Do you like this idea?" Hannah's eyes flickered. So many things fell on her, and the offer to sell her apartment and talk about marriage, all this was necessary to comprehend. But Gilbert waited for an immediate answer. He was so convincing and enthusiastic that Hannah agreed. Really, why hesitate? Gilbert had proven the truth of his feelings more than once. They're together. They're the closest persons they have to each other. Ahead lies a happy family life and a joint business. Gilbert is solid as a rock. He loves her. He really does. Everyone can see it in his words, his actions, his looks. So, what's there to think about? Gilbert and Hannah got married a month after that conversation. They didn't have a luxurious wedding, although Gilbert's parents insisted on a lavish celebration. Of course, the only son is getting married, but for Hannah, who was there to invite? No relatives, no close friends, and the money that would have been spent on the wedding was better saved for business development. They were both passionate about the idea. The business was their common child and their dream. So Gilbert and Hannah signed the papers at the registry office and just celebrated it with Gilbert's parents in a restaurant. Gilbert's father quickly left. He was a busy man, constantly receiving calls and required for work processes. But Gilbert's mother, Mrs. Russo, was already retired. She had once worked with her husband, but now she had retired and was in no hurry to go anywhere. Hannah never realized whether Mrs. Russo liked her or not. She behaved like a snow queen, unemotional, a little prim, impeccably polite. It was impossible to guess what feelings this woman was experiencing at any given moment. Hannah immediately realized that their relationship would not be close. It was a pity because Hannah wanted to feel warmth and acceptance from Gilbert's family. "Mum, she's just such a person," Gilbert explained later, "but she's good, really good. Don't worry about it. Mum is not going to get in our way." "It seemed to me that she wanted another wife for you from a wealthier family." no, Gilbert smiled. You just don't know her. She doesn't judge people like that. She's all about what that person is like on their own, and you're wonderful. And my mum understood that. She's a good judge of people. One way or another, Mrs. Russo remained cold and aloof. They saw each other occasionally at family holidays or just for fun, and sometimes had lunch or dinner together. Mrs. Russo did not attempt to get closer, but also did not show dislike, never trying to insult her motherless daughter-in-law. She just kept her distance. And Gilbert's father, Hannah almost never saw. He was always on business trips or at meetings. Anyhow, Hannah sold her apartment, invested the money into the business, and it began to grow and prosper. Sales increased, new clients appeared, and the small company turned into a powerful market player. The business required a lot of time and effort, so first Hannah quit her job, and then Gilbert left his uncle's firm. The couple focused entirely on their own business. Both worked tirelessly from dawn to dusk, standing side by side like two dedicated warriors, unafraid of hard work and challenges. This dedication paid off. There was almost no time for rest. Hannah was in the office 24 hours a day, while Gilbert travelled the country searching for big clients and the best suppliers. They each had their roles, and they understood that only together were they a force. The couple had many plans and ideas for developing the business. They shared goals, brought them closer, making them feel like one. Hannah was amazed at her husband's efficiency and enthusiasm, and he never tired of praising his wife's sharp mind. Hannah was proficient with financial reports and planning, and most successful ideas were born in her mind. The couple realized they were very close to their dream. Soon their business would be able to operate almost independently, giving them freedom, money, and the opportunity to travel and rest. They enjoyed working to achieve success and overcome difficulties, but still desired a more flexible schedule. Then came an unexpected pregnancy, like a thunderbolt. The couple hadn't planned for children yet. It wasn't the right time. How could they manage a child with all of their workload? They had plans for heirs, but in the distant future, when their company could run without their constant supervision. At first, Hannah thought the dizziness, nausea and stomach pains were from overwork, or perhaps a stomach issue. She went to the doctor and was shocked by the news. She was congratulated on her pregnancy and prescribed vitamins. Hannah returned home in tears. Gilbert was working remotely that day from their apartment. Seeing his wife upset, he turned pale, fearing she had serious health problems. "I'm expecting a baby," Hannah almost whispered. "How can this be? We've taken every precaution." "A baby?" Gilbert's face lit up with joy. Hannah saw that he had no doubts or worries, just genuine happiness. "Really? It's wonderful!" She did not expect such a reaction from her husband. She thought he would be confused or upset, but his face shone with a happy smile. This reaction deeply affected Hannah. She suddenly felt joy too. The couple embraced and immediately began to make plans for the future. They were both businesslike and pragmatic. "Don't worry, our business is already at a level where I can manage it alone," Gilbert said, stroking Hannah's hair. "The main thing is we'll have a baby. I've been dreaming about it for a long time. I just didn't tell you because I saw you weren't ready yet." "Pregnancy is not a disease," Hannah replied. "I'll be able to work even while pregnant. And after the baby is born too. Not as much as now, of course, but still." "We'll manage everything, don't worry," Gilbert assured her. "We're together." But Hannah was wrong. Her pregnancy turned out to be difficult. The future mum felt bad, often needing to go to the hospital. Gilbert assured her that her main focus should be their baby, but Hannah felt incomplete because she couldn't devote time to their family business as before. She saw how hard it was for Gilbert alone. Her husband disappeared into the office, burdened with all the problems and tasks. This upset Hannah. She hoped that when the child was born things would get easier. Not immediately, of course, but children grow up fast. Heidi was born much prematurely. Due to her prematurity, the baby had health problems. For the first years of her daughter's life, Hannah focused entirely on her treatment, withdrawing from the business. However, Gilbert still needed her help with reports. After spending a hard day with her daughter, Hannah would sit at the kitchen table at night, delving into financial indicators, summarizing results, and making important business decisions. Gilbert could only trust his wife with some things, not the chief accountant. Hannah appreciated this trust, even though it was hard for her. She felt sleepy and her head buzzed, but she didn't complain. She even liked the feeling. Even on maternity leave, I haven't lost my touch. I am still as good as ever. Heidi gradually grew stronger, and the diagnoses that initially scared doctors disappeared one by one. This brought joy and relief, but the girl was still capricious and needed a lot of attention. Hannah was very tired. At least Mrs. Russo took on some of the care. Hannah's mother-in-law adored her granddaughter, smiled at her, and said affectionate words to the little girl. Even Gilbert was surprised by this. "Mum just transforms next to Heidi," the young father said, shaking his head. "I've never seen her like this, not even when I was a kid myself." Heidi performed a real miracle. She melted the heart of the Snow Queen. However, this had little effect on the relationship between Mrs. Russo and Hannah. The mother-in-law still kept her distance, but now they saw each other more often. Mrs. Russo frequently visited Hannah to take her granddaughter for a walk. For the young mother, it was a time of rest and calmness, which she needed as much as air. 5 years passed. Hannah could not return to work because she needed to take care of Heidi. The girl still required rehabilitation and constant attention, and she often caught colds. Being premature, Heidi could not attend kindergarten. Hannah spent nights helping her husband with his reports. They used to share responsibilities equally, but now Gilbert carried most of the load for the family business, while Hannah only helped. There was no shortage of money. The business brought stable income. However, the dream of running the business independently was still far off, so Gilbert spent most of his time at work, and Hannah managed the house and took care of the child. Heidi was a separate victory for Hannah. The girl had been predicted to have several disorders, but constant training and rehabilitation worked wonders. Heidi was now not particularly different from her peers. Thin and often sick, but otherwise quite an ordinary child. Only Hannah knew how much effort went into this and understood there was still a lot of work ahead. But Heidi's prospects were excellent, which meant Hannah had to keep working hard. She was used to that. Hannah had little time for herself. The baby, the paperwork, and the housework took a lot of energy. Lately, she didn't even like looking at herself in the mirror. She had gained weight, not quite fat, but not as graceful as 5 years ago. Her skin was grey from lack of sleep, with bruises under her eyes, and her hair was always in a careless bun. Hannah's clothing style had become sporty. The narrow skirts and stylish blouses hung in the far corner of the closet, along with dusty high heels. Jeans, loose t-shirts, and sneakers made up Hannah's everyday look. They were comfortable and hid the extra pounds, and heels weren't practical for chasing a nimble child on the playground. Her friend from her university days, Lauren, often scolded Hannah. "You give your all to your family. Do you think anyone will appreciate that? I don't think so. You can't do that. You have to think of yourself too." Of course, there was truth in Lauren's words, but if Hannah spent a lot of time on herself now, who would take care of Heidi, the house, and the financial reports? Hannah preferred to think that this situation was temporary. When her daughter grew up, she would take care of herself and return to work full-time. She just needed to be patient. It was a phase. Only this phase never ended. The most unpleasant thing was that Gilbert had become distant. It was understandable. Work brought a lot of worries and troubles, but now this man came home late or even slept at the office. He listened to his wife half-heartedly. Heidi's affairs were of little interest to him. The only thing they still talked about were the financial reports Hannah checked and prepared, as if they were colleagues or bosses and subordinates. The couple no longer went out together as they used to, not even to corporate parties. Gilbert preferred to go alone. "Well, Heidi has no one to stay with, and you won't be interested there. Almost no one you know. The team have changed. I wouldn't go myself if it weren't my duty." Hannah understood perfectly well why Gilbert was against their appearance together. She was never stupid. Of course, her husband was embarrassed by her current appearance. Gilbert had always been attracted to brightly coloured beauties, and Hannah herself was such a few years ago, but their family life and raising a sick child had taken its toll. It was a shame to realise that her husband was ashamed of her. Hannah blamed herself for not having time for much and perhaps wrongly organising her time and priorities. With time, Gilbert even began to avoid touching her. When Hannah tried to hug him or press against him, the man invariably withdrew, as if an invisible wall had grown between them. Hannah hoped she could return to their previous relationship. She read articles by psychologists, looked for information, and began to exercise at home. She didn't have time for the gym, so she worked out with Heidi in front of the TV. Both of them even began to enjoy it. Hannah realised that her marriage was under threat, and she now had a great responsibility as a woman. She was determined to fight for her family's happiness. At that time, she didn't realise that it wasn't about her at all. The epiphany came one late evening. Gilbert, as usual, returned late. Heidi was already asleep in her room. Hannah was reading in bed. Gilbert looked glum and thoughtful. He went straight to the bathroom, leaving his cell phone, which he usually never let out of his hands, on the nightstand. When Gilbert was taking a shower, his cell phone vibrated. Hannah knew her husband could get work calls at any time. The company's partners lived and worked in different time zones, so late calls were not uncommon. Hannah decided to take the call. It might be urgent. "Hello, Mr. Russo," said a polite male voice on the other end. "It's from the Heritage Restaurant. I wanted to inform you that your beautiful companion left her purse on the table. A courier will bring it to you at the specified address. We take care of our regular customers." Hannah gently pressed reset. Almost immediately the phone vibrated again. Probably the man from the restaurant still intended to get the exact address where the purse should be delivered. Hannah dropped the call. She wrapped herself in the blanket, lay on her side, pulled her knees up to her chin, and thought. The water was running in the bathroom. There, under the shower, stood her husband, Gilbert, a man whom Hannah trusted boundlessly, though it seemed in vain. She believed their difficulties were temporary, that everything would work out, and that their relationship would improve with a little effort. And now it turned out that her husband was a regular customer of one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, and he went there with a beautiful companion. Mr. Russo and his beautiful companion. So, Gilbert had a mistress. Well, a wealthy man can afford it. So, work wasn't the reason he was constantly absent from home or on frequent business trips. Maybe it's just a vacation with his mistress. Oh, what a fool I am. I even felt sorry for him working so hard. Poor guy. He can't see the light of day. So, while I fought with Heidi's problems, raised the child, provided comfort at home, and spent nights over financial reports, my dear hubby had fun. He stopped paying attention to me and daughter, and I blamed myself for it. How stupid I was. And how could I not notice such a thing? At that moment, Gilbert came out of the bathroom. Hannah looked at her husband with entirely different eyes, noticing his fit, athletic body. Of course, he had set up a mini gym in his office. Tanned, handsome, confident and wealthy. Such a man is a magnet for a certain category of women. Hannah suddenly felt bad for herself. All these years, Gilbert lived the way he wanted to live and put himself first, while for her, the interests of their family came first. And here's the result. Your beautiful companion forgot her bag at the Heritage, Hannah said in a casual voice, rising in bed. What? Gilbert was taken aback. Who let you take my phone? I answered the call. I thought it was for work, but it's an entirely different matter. Gilbert quickly pulled himself together. He went to the closet, took out his pyjamas and started to change, as if nothing had happened. No shadow of guilt or confusion, as if it was just the way it should be. So there's nothing you want to tell me? Hannah felt herself boiling over. Unlike her spouse, she had a hard time keeping her cool. Well, you found out everything yourself. Gilbert picked up a blanket and pillow from the bed. And yet? All right. Gilbert looked at his wife with a calm, confident look, which pissed her off even more. Yes, I have a woman. Young, beautiful, interesting. She's interesting and fun, you know? It's like I'm energized by her. And she loves me. I love you too. The words came out of Hannah's mouth before she could think. She didn't want to confess her feelings to her traitor husband in such a situation. But it was true. Hannah really loved Gilbert. He was still the closest and dearest person to her. Love? Gilbert grinned. It doesn't sound like it. All I hear from you is Heidi, Heidi, as if there are no other topics. And look at yourself. What have you become? At first I didn't realize what was wrong. My feelings for you seemed to cool down gradually. Then I realized I'm moving forward, and you're not just standing still, you're degenerating. Her husband's words hurt Hannah's heart. It was painful and unfair. You were smart and beautiful once. I didn't understand what was happening. I thought maybe we just needed to reconcile. We'd grown up, the household, the baby. I guess it's only when you're young that you still have strong feelings and vivid emotions. And then I met her, Dana. It was like she breathed life into me. Everything around me became bright and interesting again. I came alive, literally lived. But at home, with you, I get this, some kind of longing, a feeling of hopelessness. Dana gives me strength and energy, inspires me. So, that's the name of my husband's beautiful companion, Hannah thought to herself. Surely she is a real beauty, with a model appearance. It is unlikely that Gilbert would pay attention to another. We are both to blame for this, Gilbert said. Now there was a sadness in his voice, but Hannah couldn't determine whether it was sincere or contrived, appropriate to the moment. Well, since it so happened that you now know everything, it's time to talk about the divorce. Dana, she's tired of being my mistress, tired of hiding. I thought about telling you myself. It was difficult to make up my mind. And then this happened. It's a good thing it happened. Not now. Hannah shook her head. I need to think it over. Sure. Gilbert nodded and walked out of the bedroom with a blanket and pillow in his hands. Of course, Hannah couldn't sleep that night. She cried, quietly tucking into her pillow. The tears brought temporary relief, and then the mental torment began again. She blamed herself, then Gilbert, then this strange Dana. What kind of creature do you have to be to have an affair with a married man? Hannah also thought about the future. How will we live apart now? We'll have to divide the property. It's a hard and long process. Heidi. Of course, she is almost completely unattached to her father, but still the girl will ask questions. What should I answer? How to explain the situation to a 5-year-old? Toward morning, Hannah fell into a heavy sleep. When Heidi woke her up, Gilbert was already gone. He had gone to work. Or maybe not to work. Who knows now? 3 days had passed. Gilbert had been living away from home, probably with his mistress. Maybe he rented her an apartment. Or who knows, maybe he bought some apartments for Dana. Hannah was slowly getting used to the idea of divorce, accepting it. It's hard, of course, but I'm neither the first nor the last. Things happen. She began to plan her future without her husband, to think about how to live on. She wasn't too worried about the financial side. Hannah had prepared financial reports for the company for many years. She understood perfectly well that the income from the family business was more than good. It was a profitable business. After it was sold, there was good money to be made, enough to live a nice, comfortable life. In addition, there is also the jointly acquired property during marriage, an apartment they recently bought, and several expensive cars. With a daughter, they wouldn't starve. She wouldn't need to file for alimony. But then Hannah was in for an unpleasant surprise. She agreed with Gilbert to meet in a cafe to discuss the details of the divorce. For some reason, Hannah felt like she was going on a date. For the first time in a long while, she did light makeup and put on a dress. "Have a seat," Gilbert gestured to invite his spouse to the table. "You look good. Well done." He was probably trying to be polite and gallant, or at least somehow make amends for his betrayal. Yes, betrayal. That's precisely what it's called. They talked a little about Heidi, and then Gilbert asked, "Have you decided where you're going to live now?" "What?" Hannah was stunned. "Are you planning to sell the apartment? Somehow I thought you were going to leave it to us for now. This is not the time to sell. Heidi has to go back to rehab. Why don't we sell it later?" "Sell it? No, Dana and I are planning to live there." Hannah stared at Gilbert in disbelief. "She loves the neighborhood. She loves the apartment. She's already got a lot of ideas for renovations." "And if I don't agree?" Hannah felt herself becoming enraged. Gilbert had changed so much. He was willing to kick his daughter and ex-wife out of the apartment to fulfill a new woman's whim? Outrageous. Hannah, purely out of principle, would not let the traitor carry out his plan. "And your consent is not required," Gilbert said. "What do you mean? The apartment was purchased in marriage. It's a jointly acquired property, so—" "Everything is registered to my mother. Business, apartment, cars, even a bank account in her name. I'm telling you, you've been clueless lately. You don't even look into these things." "You were only talking about one of the cars." Hannah shook her head bitterly. Yes, Gilbert had indeed somehow registered a new car to Mrs. Russo, explaining it by saying that there were tax benefits for pensioners. Apparently, for the same reason, he re-registered their common business to her, except that this time he didn't even consult his wife. "You went behind my back. You're a monster." "Don't exaggerate," Gilbert calmly objected. "Behind what back? I gave you the documents to sign. I brought them home. You, as always, only thought about the baby and going to bed early. I didn't hide anything. You didn't look into it yourself." Hannah remembered that period. Then Heidi's life and health hung literally by a thread. Doctors made frightening diagnoses, and treatment required Hannah's full involvement. She burned out and really lost her grip. There was simply no strength left for anything else but her daughter. "Everything is written down in my mother's name, so you and I actually have nothing to share." "Well, that's not fair. How can you do this to me? Do this to us? What about Heidi?" "I'll pay good alimony to Heidi, enough for rent, living expenses, and medical treatment if necessary." "But we started this company together, didn't we? I sold my only home for this business. I put everything into it because I knew we were in this together. We'd support each other. And now you're doing this to me." "To be perfectly honest, I did most of the company. You were at home. You weren't even interested, especially in the company."
What about the reports? You dumped a lot of work on me. It was hard on me. I was up all night compiling reports. And in the morning, I had to go to the hospital with my daughter again. Do you have any idea what it cost me? Hannah, why are you being such a little girl? It's such a small thing, it's not even worth talking about. Thanks for your help. I won't leave you destitute either. I'll help you. Thank you very much, Hannah blurted out with bitterness in her voice. Keep in mind, I won't give up what's mine so easily. I'll fight. I'll hire lawyers. It's your right, but you're wasting your time and money. The documents are all clean. The business is registered to my mother, the apartment and cars too. Your lawyers will tell you the same thing. He left, and Hannah sat in the cafe for a long time, digesting the new information. She had just gotten over the shock of Gilbert's betrayal, and now this. Hannah hired lawyers, which delayed the divorce process. The woman now had to be in court often. Mrs. Russo took care of her daughter during that time. Yes, the very mother-in-law on whom all of this property of the spouses was written down. Hannah simply had no one else to turn to. She understood, of course, that Mrs. Russo would support her son in everything, especially since there had never been a warm and trusting relationship between her and her daughter-in-law. Mrs. Russo kept her distance from Hannah. Recently she stopped coming to see her granddaughter, but when Hannah called and asked for help, she did not refuse. About affairs with her son, Hannah did not even start a conversation. She realized that Mrs. Russo would obey Gilbert in everything. What Gilbert said, she would do. But with her granddaughter, she helped her almost ex-daughter-in-law a lot. Hannah couldn't even hire a nanny. As it turned out, she had nothing at all now, and now she lived not on the money that the common business brought, as she wished before, but on the handouts of a successful husband. It was humiliating and offensive. Hannah now knew what Dana looked like. She sometimes appeared at the trials together with Gilbert. Tall, dark-haired, long-legged and very slender, her long, dark brown hair flowed beautifully over her graceful shoulders. Gilbert's hand was almost always on Dana's waist, and she looked at him so devotedly that Hannah began to understand her husband. It must be hard to resist the gaze of such a beauty. Gilbert, it turns out that Hannah never really knew him, or he suddenly changed dramatically, literally reincarnated into another person. The bond that was between them was slowly and painfully severed. That was hard too. Hannah turned off the light and lay down, still in her bedroom, cosy and familiar. Soon she and Heidi would have to leave this apartment. Although there was still hope, albeit faint. Tomorrow is the decisive meeting, which will finally clarify everything. Gilbert was right. Hannah's lawyers could not do anything, and at the final hearing, the judge gave the verdict. All documents are correct. The spouses have no property in joint ownership. Heidi was given a penniless alimony payment, since Gilbert, of course, had set himself the minimum official salary. Hannah left the courthouse on wobbly legs. She was left with nothing. She saw Gilbert gallantly open the door of his new SUV for Dana, who slid gracefully inside, and then they sped away. And what am I to do? How to raise Heidi? I can't even go to work, because my daughter is still too weak and sickly. Hannah called a cab. She had to go to her mother-in-law's to pick up Heidi. Of course, Mrs. Russo never refused to babysit her granddaughter. But she was involved in Gilbert's treacherous scheme. She couldn't have been unaware of her son's plans. With a heavy heart, Hannah rang her mother-in-law's doorbell. She lived in a new house in the city centre, in a luxurious 2-story apartment. The woman opened the door and smiled at Hannah. Yes, she smiled. It was unusual, to say the least. Mrs. Russo held Heidi in her arms, and the girl was smiling broadly too. "Mummy's here," she rejoiced, reaching her arms towards Hannah. "Come in. Now we'll have coffee and cake. We have a lot to talk about." It was all very strange somehow. Hannah sat down modestly on the edge of the chair. "Do you want it with milk?" Mrs. Russo inquired in a mundane tone. Hannah nodded. "I know what just happened in court. Gilbert has already reported. You're left with nothing." "Why did he do that to me?" Hannah burst out. She wasn't going to discuss it with her mother-in-law, but she couldn't stand it. And then Mrs. Russo herself started the conversation. "Why does he treat you so?" "It's not about you at all." The older woman shook her head. "Don't even think that you've done anything wrong. You tried very hard. It's his nature, his genes. I don't know. Maybe I missed something in his upbringing too." Hannah looked at her mother-in-law with wide eyes. Not at all the words she expected to hear from Mrs. Russo. It was as if she was siding with her daughter-in-law instead of supporting her son. "My current husband, he's not Gilbert's father after all, not his real father. Peter raised him as his own. My son's bio-dad ran away as soon as he found out about the pregnancy, or rather, he was taken away by a prettier, brighter, richer girl, and I was left alone. Peter had long loved me, supported me at that moment and took my son as his own, but Gilbert, it seems, took more from his own father than we all would have liked. And now he practically did the same thing to his wife as his father did to him. Even worse." "I didn't know that." "Well, now you do. Gilbert, he's a manipulator. Do you know what he told me about you? To win my approval? To get me on his side in the divorce?" "What?" "He said you're a frivolous woman and the baby's not his. He told me that a while ago, when he signed over the property to me. He said if there's a divorce, he didn't want to give you anything because you came into his ready-made business and didn't earn anything on your own." "I came into his ready-made business? Did I? We built this business together. Is that what he told you about me?" "He did. I believed it, you know. I just never really got into what was going on with you, so I had no reason not to believe my son. Besides, I always dreamed of having a daughter, but God didn't give me and Peter any children. And here's Heidi, my granddaughter, a girl, a princess, my favourite little girl. I couldn't get enough of her. I don't think I've ever loved anyone in my life as much as I loved her. And then Gilbert says that she's not my own. Oh, how angry I was with you then. Maybe you noticed I stopped coming to see you, although I missed Heidi very much. But I thought maybe if I saw her less often I'd forget about her, and it wouldn't hurt so much. But it didn't work. Still, my heart was torn to the little girl." Meanwhile, Mrs. Russo's son started divorce proceedings. Gilbert was very happy that all his property was recorded in his mother's name, and his unfaithful wife would get nothing. And Mrs. Russo thought that was fair. Of course, she herself was in the same position. Peter also took her with the child, but she was faithful to her husband and grateful that he supported her so much and did not leave her in trouble. And this Hannah, she kept going out with others. At least that's what Gilbert said. According to him, he tormented, suffered, tried to reason with his wife, and then met a new woman and decided that this could not go on. So he started this divorce. And Mrs. Russo supported him. Who would like to see their child, though already an adult, suffering? And then, when Hannah hired lawyers, one of them even came to Mrs. Russo, showed some papers, and said that Hannah made a great contribution to the development of the business, and not only in the form of hard labour, but also in money. And from that moment, Mrs. Russo hesitated. This lawyer made her think. She hired a man to look into it for her. That's when it all came out. Yes, indeed, many years ago Hannah sold her apartment. The couple used the money to start their business, and then she worked hard to make their business flourish. Mrs. Russo realized that Gilbert was not telling her the whole truth. And then she had hope. Maybe the words about her granddaughter were also lies. She kept the first cut strand of her son's hair as a memento, as many people did back then. Heidi often visited her grandmother, especially in recent days because Hannah now and then had to attend court hearings. So, Mrs. Russo decided to analyse the DNA with the material she had at hand. And today the results came back. Heidi is Gilbert's daughter and my granddaughter. There is no doubt about it. I'm sorry I doubted you, but Gilbert, he's very persuasive. After the divorce, Gilbert, feeling a sense of accomplishment, flew to the sea with Dana to celebrate their victory and newfound freedom. They decided to mark the end of a long and stressful process with a bang, choosing a luxurious report and sparing no expense. Gilbert believed all the property was now his, and Dana was equally confident. She loved a bright, beautiful life and felt she deserved it. Her dazzling appearance, a gift from birth, was something she treated as capital and rarely hid. This was why Gilbert fought so hard to take everything from his ex-wife, realizing he needed money to be with someone as beautiful as Dana. Now he had them. Gilbert had no doubts about his mother. He had relied on her completely. His mother considered Hannah a loose woman and hated her for giving her a granddaughter who, it turned out, wasn't related by blood to her. But upon his return, Gilbert faced an unpleasant surprise. His mother had sold everything. The business, the property, everything. She could do it all on her own because everything was registered in her name. The woman gave all the money to her granddaughter and former daughter-in-law, leaving Gilbert with nothing. However, Hannah showed unexpected generosity. Once Gilbert recovered from the shock, Hannah transferred half the funds to him. She didn't even call him, she wrote a letter. "We built this business together. The company is our joint brainchild. You betrayed me and did a terrible thing, but I'm not like you. As it turns out, we are very different. The fair thing to do is to give you half of our money, so I'll do the fair thing. There's nothing to bind us now. Goodbye and have good luck." Gilbert had to start from scratch. The new business was not as profitable as the old one. Before, Hannah had been by his side, creating the company together, supporting each other, and fighting shoulder to shoulder. Now Gilbert was alone with all the problems and didn't always handle them well. He lost most of the money he got after the divorce due to poor investments and mistakes. Dana soon left Gilbert for a richer, more successful man. Meanwhile, Hannah moved with her daughter to another city to start over. She had enough money to live on and travelled a lot with Heidi, exploring the world. It was fascinating and exciting. Hannah and Gilbert didn't maintain relations, and he didn't seek to communicate, possibly still ashamed to face his former wife. Hannah and Mrs. Russo, however, became true friends. They often went out together, talked a lot, and Hannah felt happy. She was sure that she had a long, rich life ahead, filled with many interesting encounters and happy moments.